Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, I've got 8 true-style Appalachian encounters, lanterns in the fog, footsteps too close behind, and figures that follow you without ever showing a face. These are the kinds of stories that linger, not for what you see, but for what you can't. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and share with someone who's walked these mountains at night. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, settle in. It's time to begin. The snow had started again, sometime after dusk, a thin veil whispering down through the pines, settling over the narrow trail that twisted like a spine along Devil's Backbone. I was heading home from the last deer hunt of the season, the bitter cold having chased off most game days ago. The ridge was slick with ice, and the light was falling fast, turning everything to shades of gray. I should have been back by now. But the trail was slower than I remembered, and I was tired, bone-tired. My pack felt heavier than usual, half a thermos of lukewarm coffee sloshing inside, doing nothing to keep the cold from gnawing at my fingers. I'm Ray Stinson, 43. Been in Harper's Glen my whole life, a little hollow tucked 5 miles east of the Backbone. Folks around here hunt because we have to, not for sport, not for bragging rights, because it's how we keep freezers full and kids fed through January. My old man taught me the ridge when I was just tall enough to see over a rifle barrel. He used to say, "Don't trust the Backbone after dark. It remembers what we forget." Every winter, someone would bring up the story of the faceless man, the one who died in the 35 blizzard, how he still wanders the ridge, blind and searching, never finding his way down. I never gave much weight to that tale, not until that night. It began as a sound. I'd stopped to fix the rifle strap digging into my shoulder, and behind me, there it was, another set of footsteps, light but distinct. I stood still, heart ticking loud in my chest, and turned. The trail behind me was untouched, just my own tracks trailing off into the gloom and snow drifting down in soft swirls. Maybe an echo, maybe wind in the trees, I told myself, and moved on. The cold had teeth. My scarf was frozen stiff where my breath had soaked it, and my fingers stung even in thick gloves. I kept my eyes on the trail, not thinking about much, just trying to get back before full dark. Then, around a bend near the old stone marker, I saw something that made me stop dead. A figure stood on the trail ahead. Thin, tall, motionless, just far enough that I couldn't make out any features, but close enough that I knew it wasn't a tree. At first, I thought it might be another hunter someone lost, maybe, but the way it stood, not shifting, not bracing against the cold, just there, it set something deep inside me on edge. "Evening," I called, voice catching in my throat. Nothing, no movement. I turned slightly, pretending to check my pack, and when I looked back up, the figure was closer, only a few feet, but closer, and I hadn't heard it move. That was the worst part, how it never made a sound. I stared harder, trying to see the face, but there was nothing, just darkness where features should have been. A blur, like snow had smudged it out. I turned away again, slower this time, uneasy in my chest. The moment my back turned, I heard its footsteps, slow, crunching in the snow behind me. I spun fast, Nothing. The trail was empty again. I searched the trees, heart hammering. There was something out there, something watching. I started moving. Faster now. Not running, but close. The trail narrowed here. One side, a drop into darkness. The other, a steep slope of jagged stone. I didn't have many choices. Every few steps, the sound returned. Footsteps echoing mine. Getting bolder. Once. I turned quick enough to catch something, a flicker of movement vanishing behind a pine. I didn't call out again. I didn't want to hear silence. Then, just before the last bend that leads to my cabin, I heard it breathing. Right behind me, slow, ragged, like wind dragging through wet leaves. I froze. My own breath clouded the air, white and shaky. I didn't dare turn. I knew if I did, I'd see it too close. I took a step. It followed. I broke into a run. The cabin door slammed behind me so hard it rattled the windows. I locked it, braced my back against it, rifle ready. I didn't sleep. Just sat there, waiting. When dawn came, pale and gray, I stepped out into the still morning. The snow was fresh and undisturbed. Only one set of tracks led down the ridge. Mine. I told myself it had to be a dream. Maybe the cold played tricks on me, or I'd slipped into a waking nightmare brought on by exhaustion. I wanted that to be the truth, but all day, I felt like something was watching me through the trees. I kept the fire high, every curtain shut tight. Still, the silence outside felt too complete, like the woods were holding their breath. Later that evening, I went to bring in wood from the shed, and that's when I noticed at the cabin door had a single, wet handprint just above the handle. No prints in the snow. No sign of anyone walking up. Just that handprint. Long fingers, splayed wide, and no sign of skin texture. It was smooth, almost featureless. I stood there staring until the cold started to bite through my flannel. That night, the footsteps came back. Not outside, but on the roof. I sat up in bed, heart slamming so loud I thought it might wake the trees. Slow, steady steps paced across the shingles, then stopped right above my room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The weight shifted once wood creaked, then silence. I must have passed out from sheer tension, because next thing I knew, it was morning again. I hiked into town the next day, told a half-lie to Sheriff Muncie about maybe some drifter poking around. He said he'd send a man to check it out, but his tone told me he didn't believe a word. Folks around here don't talk about the backbone much, never directly. But when I mentioned where I'd been, he went quiet and offered me coffee without another question. For a while, things settled. A week passed. I started sleeping again, though never deep. Then, one night, I woke up to the wind hammering the shutters. At least, I thought it was the wind. But when I sat up, I realized it wasn't random. It was rhythmic. 3 slow knocks against the cabin wall. Then nothing. Then 3 more. I grabbed the rifle, crept to the door. But before I could open it, something slid an envelope under the gap. I stared at it, heart clenching. No footsteps away. No shadows through the frosted window. Just the envelope. Yellowed like it had been in someone's pocket for years. Inside was a single slip of paper. All it said was, "Still lost." I burned it in the fireplace without thinking. That was 2 nights ago. Since then, every time I glance at the window, I think I see something just outside the edge of the glass. Something tall, something still. But when I go look, there's nothing. I haven't stepped back on the ridge since, and I never will. But sometimes, deep in the night, I hear slow breathing through the walls, and I don't think it's mine. I'd been on night patrols before, but that night, the hollow felt like a different country. The fog didn't drift like it usually did. It clung low to the laurels, thick as wool. My boots made the damp leaves sigh under me. Each step swallowed up before the sound could carry. It was a new moon night, which meant no stars either, just the dim glow of my flashlight and the narrow beam it carved into the mist. I was 2 months into my rookie season as a park ranger, stationed out here in Laurel Hollow. I'd grown up in Fairview, a town just 20 miles north, and I used to think I knew these woods. My dad had taken me fishing in the valley streams when I was little. I still remembered the way he'd checked the clouds before we went in. Said the hollow had a mind of its own when it came to weather. When the wind died, he'd tell me to listen. If it's too quiet, we turn around. He'd say, back then, I thought he was joking. The patrol that night was simple on paper: walk the valley trail, check the ridgeline for smoke or heat, log any signs of careless campers. The summer had been bone dry, and a single spark could eat half the park if we weren't quick. My supervisor, Albright, handed me the map and radio and said, "Stay on the marked trail. The hollow will twist you up faster than you think." I'd laughed, but he didn't. About 20 minutes in, I saw it. At first, I thought it was another ranger ahead, someone from the late shift heading back. A faint golden light moved between the laurels, weaving slow, not in a straight line. My flashlight barely touched it, and when I blinked, it was gone. I turned in a slow circle, shining my beam through the fog. But then the glow flared again, this time farther ahead on the trail. I told myself it was a camper who'd ignored the fire bans. I even started rehearsing what I'd say when I caught up. "Sir, you can't be using lanterns out here. There's a risk of wildfire." My voice sounded steadier in my head than my legs felt under me. I walked faster. The trail bent left around an old sycamore whose trunk was a hollow at the base. I passed it, keeping my eyes on that light ahead. But the weird thing was, no matter how much ground I covered, it stayed the same distance away. And it was never behind me, only ahead. Even when the path looped back on itself, somewhere near the bend by the creek crossing, my radio crackled with static, sharp and sudden. I lifted it to call in, but the interference swallowed my words. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not enough to see, just enough to make me breathe shallow. I thought of Albright's warning and almost turned back. Then I remembered the story my grandmother used to tell about the hollow. How, decades ago, a young woman from town went walking here after dusk, carrying a lantern to find her way home. She never made it. Folks searched for a week, found nothing but her empty lantern by the creek. "If you see her light," Grandma would say, "don't follow. She's still looking, and she'll take you with her." That memory slid into my head like it had been waiting all night. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and pushed forward anyway. The golden glow was closer now, just a few paces ahead, swaying gently. My boots hit a patch of wet ground, and I nearly slipped. That's when I saw the silhouette, through the fog. She stood in a long dress, the hem brushing the laurel leaves. Her head was bowed, hair falling forward so I couldn't see her face. In her right hand, the lantern glowed, steady and warm. She was no more than 10 yards away. I opened my mouth to speak. Then she was gone. Only the lantern remained, floating in the air where she'd stood. It hung there, motionless, like someone holding it invisible. I took one step toward it, my breath loud in my ears. I stopped mid-step, not sure if I was about to move forward or bolt back the way I'd come. The lantern didn't sway or flicker, just hung there, its golden glow cutting through the fog in a perfect little bubble. I told myself to call it in Get Albright or anyone on the radio, but when I reached for it, the static hissed again. Louder this time, like someone whispering straight into my ear. I pulled it away, heart knocking against my ribs. The fog pressed closer, and the trees around me seemed farther apart, as if the trail had stretched. One more step forward, then another. The cold in the air sharpened until my teeth hurt. I could see the thin wire handle of the lantern, the glass panes streaked with soot. Every nerve in my body said, "Don't touch it," but my boots kept moving. The moment I was close enough to reach out, the lantern lifted slow, deliberate up and away, like it was being carried higher than any person's arm could reach. My breath caught. Somewhere in the laurels ahead, I heard the faintest sound of fabric dragging over leaves. I tried to follow, but the trail under me wasn't the same. My flashlight beam showed roots where the dirt path should have been, and the trees pressed in at odd angles. No landmarks, no sign of the creek or the sycamore, just fog and that drifting light. Now farther ahead, but still impossibly clear. I don't know how long I walked. My watch said 10:43 when I first saw her. But the next time I checked, the hands were stopped dead at 11:06. My legs ached, and the damp had soaked through my socks. The lantern kept leading me deeper, and I kept telling myself it was just a camper, a trick of the fog. Anything but what I knew it was. Then, without warning, it stopped. The glow flared once, brighter, as if someone had shielded it with their hand and let go. I froze. The fog around me began to thin, revealing the shapes of trees I didn't recognize. The smell of smoke was gone, and just like that, the light blinked out. I stood there in the dark, my own flashlight suddenly looking weak and useless. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no fabric dragging. Only the hollow breathing around me. When I finally found the trail again, it was as if I'd stepped out from behind a curtain. The familiar bend by the sycamore was right in front of me. My watch ticked normally. I could even hear the creek gurgling just ahead. I didn't see her again. Not that night. Not yet. But sometimes, when the valley fog creeps low and the air smells faintly of smoke, I'll catch a glimmer between the laurels, a warm, golden glow where no light should be. And every time, my feet stop before I even think about it, because I know if I take one more step, she might finally turn and show me her face. The path through the Johnson woods wasn't really a path, more of a worn-down strip of leaves and dirt that the neighborhood kids used when they didn't feel like walking all the way around the ridge. I'd been taking it for years, usually in the summer when the daylight lasted long enough to see where you were stepping. But autumn changed the woods. The trees leaned in closer, and the shadows fell faster. I was 17 that year, senior at Clay County High, and more than ready to be out of this place. My folks' house sat on the far side of the ridge, a weathered 2-story farmhouse with peeling white paint and a front porch that tilted just enough to make you seasick if you stood there too long. Dad was usually gone before sunrise, driving his old logging truck into the hills. Mom worked nights at the nursing home over in Elkhorn, which meant I came home to an empty house most evenings. I didn't mind, it gave me time to raid the fridge and beat my little sister to the TV. That Friday afternoon had the kind of sky that warned you night was coming early. The clouds were thick, tinted orange and gray, and the air had that damp, earthy smell that said frost was on the way. The bus dropped me off at the stop near the Johnson place, and instead of taking the road, I cut through the sagging section of fence at the back pasture. From there, the shortcut wound between bare-limbed maples and oaks, crunching under my sneakers with every step. The old well was somewhere in these woods. I'd never gone looking for it, but people in town talked about it. A low, round ring of stone, maybe 4 feet high, no mortar holding the rocks together. They said it was older than the county line, maybe older than the houses that had stood here before the timber companies cleared the ridge. The story went that 2 neighbors fought over whose property it was on. One man got shoved in, still alive when he fell. They didn't pull him out until he wasn't. That story didn't bother me much as a kid, but walking through the trees that evening, I caught something that made me slow down. The air changed. It was cooler, colder than it should have been for October, and carried a dampness that clung to my skin. The smell of wet stone drifted in, sharp and metallic. I didn't hear the wind anymore. The usual leaf rustle had gone silent, like the whole woods was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe just a pocket of low ground holding moisture from last night's rain. But when I stepped through a cluster of saplings, I found myself at the edge of a clearing I'd never seen before. Right in the center stood the well. The stones were darker than I'd imagined, slick with moss and shadow. The weeds around it had gone brittle and black from the frost, leaning away like they didn't want to touch it. And next to the well was a man. He stood with his head bowed, chin nearly touching his chest. His hair was long and dark, falling forward to hide his face. His hands hung loose at his sides. The longer I looked, the more I realized he wasn't moving, not shifting his weight, not breathing in any way I could see. I froze just inside the tree line, the strap of my backpack cutting into my shoulder. Then, slow as if it took effort, he lifted his head towards me. The dying light should have hit his face, but it didn't. The shadows pooled there, swallowing everything eyes, nose, mouth, until it was just a void where a face should be. My fingers tightened on the strap. I thought about the story again, about how the man in the well had been alive when he fell, about the cold, wet air sliding over my skin now. I didn't move. Not yet. The clearing felt stretched somehow, as if the air between us had thickened. My first thought was to back away, but I couldn't seem to convince my legs to move. The man didn't step toward me right away. He only stood there, his head tilted slightly, the shadows hiding his face as completely as if it had been erased. Then, without a sound, he shifted his weight forward and took one slow step in my direction. That's when I heard it drip, a faint, deliberate sound, like water falling into a deep pool. Another drop followed, then another, steady as a heartbeat. His hair, still hanging heavy over his face, was wet enough that it clung in ropes. I realized the dark stains running up his sleeves weren't shadows at all. They were damp patches, spreading from his hands up to his elbows. The kind you'd get if you'd been submerged in water far too long. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight, like it didn't want to take in the cold air. The drops hit the ground without splashing, each one making the leaves at his feet darken in perfect little circles. I thought of how far the well's bottom must be, how black it would look if you leaned over. My fingers ached from holding the backpack strap so tight, but letting go felt like it would mean losing the only solid thing I had to hang on to. He stepped again, closer this time, and I could almost see movement beneath the shadows where his face should have been. Not the kind of movement that comes from breath, but something slower, as if the darkness itself was shifting. I took a step back, and the crunch of leaves under my heel sounded too loud, like it had announced my fear. That tiny sound seemed to decide it for me. I turned and ran. The trees blurred past in streaks of gray and brown. I didn't look back at first. Every part of me was focused on getting out of the clearing. The cold followed, wrapping itself around my arms and neck. And for a moment, I thought I still heard the dripping just behind me. My sneakers slid on damp leaves. But I kept going, not caring if I fell so long as I was moving away. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the clearing was gone. There were only trees close set, their trunks dark with shadow and a carpet of dry leaves underfoot. No man, no well, not even a hint of dampness on the ground. I slowed to a walk, my breath scraping in and out, and tried to tell myself I'd taken a wrong turn, stumbled into some hollow I'd never noticed before. But the truth wouldn't let me rest. The woods felt normal again, but the smell of wet stone still lingered faintly in my nose, as if it had followed me out. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not Dad, not Mom, not my friends. Some things feel heavier if you speak them out loud. Now, when I take that shortcut, I keep my eyes down and my pace quick, and I never, ever let my thoughts drift to the sound of water in the leaves. I'd been driving freight across the Appalachians for almost 16 years. And there are only two kinds of truckers who last that long. Up here, the ones who talk too much, and the ones who don't talk at all. I guess I'm somewhere in the middle. Name's Charlie Miles, 47, 2 kids in Knoxville, and a Kenworth that rattles like an old dog's bones. My route takes me through some lonely country, but I don't mind. Less traffic, less noise, just me, the road, and a thermos of bad coffee. That morning, I'd left Morganton around 3, hauling steel parts bound for a plant outside Charleston. The fog started as a low-hanging mist near the base of Hallow Ridge, a stretch of winding road folks back home always said had a memory for the dead. I always figured that meant wrecks, bad curves, poor signage. Still, I slowed down out of habit. I'd only been up that ridge once before, years ago, and all I remembered was the trees crowding the shoulder like they were leaning in to listen. Thick pines, knotted old oaks, and that silence that only the mountains seemed to know how to hold. But that morning, something else came with the silence. A sound, barely there at first, like humming. It was still dark, maybe just after 5. But the sky had started that faint blue fade before sunrise. My headlights cut through the fog in 2 useless cones, and everything past the guardrail vanished into white. That's when I noticed the humming shift into something like a melody. A woman's voice, high, slow, wordless. I turned off the radio. Didn't change a thing. Now I ain't the type to spook easy. I've dealt with ice storms, flipped rigs. A deer once came through the windshield outside Boone. But this was different. It wasn't what I heard, it was what I felt. Like the sound didn't come from outside the truck. Like it was in the air around me, pressing in soft. I downshifted on the next incline and leaned forward, squinting. That's when I saw her, right in the middle of the damn road. She stood still, barely a silhouette against the fog. Long dress, pale arms. Her hair hung low over her face. Too long, unmoving, like it wasn't touched by the breeze that rocked the pine limbs behind her. The song didn't stop. She just kept singing. No words, no rhythm, just that haunting sound. Somewhere between a lullaby and a funeral dirge. I hit the brakes, hard. The truck groaned to a halt, maybe 20 feet from her. My heart thudded like it was trying to shift out of my chest. I flicked my high beams on and leaned on the horn. No reaction. She just tilted her head, not like someone curious. No, it was too slow, too precise, like she'd heard me coming for miles and was only now acknowledging me. I didn't want to get out. I don't care if that makes me sound like a coward. I'd rather deal with a whole highway of tailgaters than whatever the hell she was. So I sat there, engine idling, wipers clicking, the song still drifting, softer now, but closer. Then she moved. Not walked, moved. 1 step, 2. The gravel didn't crunch under her feet. The fog didn't stir around her. She was just suddenly there, closer. My headlights still didn't show her face, just the shine of damp hair and the pale blur of a dress that looked soaked from the hem up. I reached for the gear shift, ready to back down that mountain if I had to. But before I could even throw it into reverse, she was at my door, right outside the driver's side window. Her hand thin, colorless, with fingers 2 long rows and pressed flat against the glass. The singing didn't stop, and I still couldn't see her face. I didn't move. My foot hovered over the brake like lifting it might break the spell, or worse, invite her in. Her hand stayed pressed against the window, no knock, no smear, just a perfect stillness. Through the glass, I could see the veins in her wrist, a faint blue web under that nearly translucent skin. And that voice still singing. No breath breaks, no catch, no human exhaustion, like a recording stuck in the same mournful loop. I should have driven. I should have floored it and taken my chances with the ditch. But I couldn't. I was locked in place, every nerve screaming without giving orders. The weird thing was, I wasn't terrified, not the way you are when something jumps out at you. It was more like dread mixed with sorrow, like I'd stumbled into someone else's grief and didn't know how to leave. Then the light changed. I didn't notice at first, but the fog behind her had started to lift just slightly, giving way to the faintest glow of dawn, but not around her. The light didn't touch her, not even a little. It curved around her silhouette like she was part of a different sky. That's when I realized I still hadn't seen her face. Her head was tilted just enough, and her hair thick enough to keep it hidden even now. She leaned closer. The hand slid down the glass slow, like melting wax. It left nothing behind, not a smudge, not a print. And still, the song came, quieter now, like she was humming just beneath the metal skin of the cab. That's when I remembered what they say about this stretch, about the widow's ghost. Back home, it's an old story. A woman whose husband never came back from the war. No one ever said which war. It changed depending on who told it. They said she waited every morning on this ridge, dressed in the same clothes she wore the day he left. Some said she walked the mountain for decades. Others said she only showed up in the fog. But they all agreed on one thing: you weren't supposed to stop. Too late for that now. My hand trembled as I reached for the dash-mounted CB. I keyed it, whispered. Anyone got ears on Hallow Ridge northbound side static? No reply. Tried again. Nothing. The hum of the engine and the fading melody were the only sounds in the world. Then she stepped back. Not much, just enough to give me a glimpse of the full figure again. Her head still low, arms slack. I don't know why, but I lowered the window a few inches. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe some dumb part of me thought she needed help. I regret that moment more than anything, because when the glass slid down, her song finally stopped, and in that breathless silence, I thought I'd hear her speak. But she didn't. She just stood there, and slowly, very slowly, began to lift her face. I slammed the window back up. Didn't wait to see. I threw the truck into gear and roared forward right through the spot where she stood. I braced for impact, for the thud of body on steel. But there was nothing. The fog parted like water around a bow. And when I looked in the mirror, she was gone. No figure, no song, just the ridge, the mist thinning, the pale hint of sunrise bleeding through the trees. I didn't stop until I reached the other side of the mountain, hands shaking too bad to hold the wheel, pulled into a diner lot, and just sat there for a good long while. I never told dispatch, never told my kids either, but I've skipped Hallow Ridge ever since. Doesn't matter if it costs me hours, I'll take the long way through Asheville or circle down through Georgia. Because whatever I saw or didn't see up there wasn't meant for this world anymore. It wasn't evil exactly, just waiting. Stuck between now and then. Sometimes, early in the morning, when the road's quiet and the air's still, I think I hear her again, just for a second. A soft, slow hum drifting through the trees. And I keep driving, always. The forest was already breathing mist by the time I reached the edge of the property. My tires had chewed up the muddy path for over a mile before I gave up and walked the last stretch on foot. Rain soaked my jacket, found its way past my collar, dripped from the bill of my cap. The only sign I was in the right place was a crumbling fence post with a rusted chain looped once through the wood. No gate. No markings. Just trees closing in around a clearing like they were ashamed of what lay inside. I was there to survey a plot listed under a defunct holding company out of Charleston. Some old land inheritance. Paperwork buried until someone finally decided to sell. My name's Derek Hall. Been doing survey work for a little over a decade. Most of it's dull walking lines, checking deeds, arguing with landowners about what counts as a creek. But sometimes, especially out in these Appalachian hollers, you get jobs like this. No clear owner, no clean title, no questions asked. The cabin sat like a wound at the center of the clearing. Fire had hollowed it out long ago. The logs were black and split, half the roof gone, windows just holes now, with rain spilling through in steady drips. Inside, the walls were scorched up to the rafters, and the floor was a mix of mud, ash, and rotten boards. I stepped carefully over the threshold, one hand on the damp frame, the other holding my gear. The air smelled like wet soot, like something had burned yesterday and still hadn't cooled. I called out anyway. Surveyor on site. My voice felt small in the ruin, muffled. No echo, just the hiss of rain on charred wood. I set up the tripod near what had probably been the front room, checking bearings and jotting coordinates. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine, not echo. They came from behind me, exactly a second after I moved slow, deliberate, wet on the ruined floor. I stopped, heart knocking once in my ribs, turned around, empty doorway, just trees and fog. I stepped again, another footstep followed. Same pace, same weight, always one beat behind. I glanced out at the clearing. No signs of recent tracks, no tire marks, no break in the grass. No way anyone had followed me out here. Not without me hearing it. But the sound repeated whenever I moved. Something moved behind me. When I stopped, it stopped. Like a shadow just out of sync. I took a slow pivot, scanning each burnt wall, each collapsed beam. That's when I saw it through the doorway, just beyond the frame. A shape. Not quite human, not quite real. Darker than the gray woods behind it, motionless in the rain. It wasn't walking, just waiting. And then it was gone. I didn't move for a long minute. The rain thudded on the wrecked roof, and somewhere beyond the trees, a crow let out a flat, ugly caw. My hands had gone cold around the survey tablet, and my boots felt nailed to the floor. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, a branch, a shadow, fog. But the sound, the footsteps, hadn't stopped. As soon as I stepped back, they came again, one pace behind. I swept the light from my headlamp across the interior. Nothing there. No footprints in the damp ash. No place for anyone to hide. But I kept catching something just out of line movement in the corners, behind where the walls used to be, like whatever it was didn't need solid footing. It was in the bones of the place. I backed towards what was left of the fireplace. The chimney had collapsed inward, scattering blackened brick and soot like someone had ripped it down from above. As I stepped over a fallen timber, I heard a board creak behind me, soft but unmistakable. The next second, the air changed cooler, tighter, like something breathing close behind my ear. I turned fast. The shadow stood in the doorway again. Closer now. It had no face, just the shape of a person, slightly hunched, like it had to duck to fit beneath the scorched frame. No eyes, no mouth, just that oppressive stillness. It didn't move, but I swear I felt it press forward, like its weight shifted without its feet. Lightning cracked outside. For a fraction of a second, the inside lit up white and the doorway was empty. But when my eyes adjusted, I saw them. Footprints, fresh ones, leading from the doorway across the ruined floor. Water pooling in each one. They matched mine exactly in shape, in length, even the tread. I looked down at my boots, still dry. I hadn't stepped there. The footsteps had come in, not mine, not following, mimicking. That's when the last piece clicked. The family that died here, no screams, no signs of struggle, just burned. All of them, still in bed. No one ever explained why none of them woke up. And suddenly, I understood the silence, the wet air, the strange timing of every step. Something in that cabin was trying to remember being alive. Or worse, trying to make me forget that I still was. I didn't grab the tripod, didn't log the rest of the data. I turned and ran, stumbling through the mud, branches slapping my face, the hiss of rain suddenly deafening. I didn't stop until I reached the truck, slammed the door, and locked it. Even though I was alone, or thought I was. I drove out fast, tires fishtailing down the wet trail. Behind me, the trees swallowed the clearing whole. No shadow followed, no face in the mirror. But I swear the truck smelled like smoke all the way back to town. And 2 days later, when I checked the soles of my boots, they were clean, but the exact prints I saw that night were dried into the floor mat on the passenger's side. The last light of the day always hit Pine Gap like a warning. The ridge cast long shadows across the single-lane road, and the trees mostly pine. Some old as tombstones leaned in from both sides like they were whispering something to each other. I'd been delivering mail in this corner of the county for 5 years, and I knew the routes like I knew the back of my hand. My name's Lester Rudd, 43, born and raised in Laurel Springs. And I don't scare easy, but I don't like Pine Gap. That night, I was running late thanks to a downed tree out on Hollow Creek Road. Had one last envelope to drop at a place tucked near the top of the ridge. A weather-stained house that barely showed on the GPS. Just a name D, Corley, and a mailbox that looked like it hadn't seen mail in months. Normally, I'd hold it for the next day. But the envelope was hand-addressed, certified, urgent. Something about it made me feel like I needed to get it there. I should have ignored that feeling. The clouds had been stacking since early afternoon, thick and low. And by the time I turned off the gravel access road and started up Pine Gap proper, the air was heavy enough to feel in my teeth. A low growl of thunder rolled across the mountains, and the first drops hit the windshield in slow, fat splats. The road narrowed. No guardrails, just dirt and gravel and an easy slip into nowhere. I drove slow, radio off. Window cracked just enough to hear the rain. That's when I saw it. About 20 yards ahead, near the edge of the tree line. A figure stood between two pine trunks, tall, unmoving, arms slack at the sides. I hit the brakes without thinking. Just a man, I told myself. Someone out walking before the storm rolled in. But he didn't move. He didn't even look at me. Just stood there in the same slack posture, like he'd been placed there by mistake. The thunder cracked again, sharper this time, and the headlights flickered as I inched forward. When they came back on full, he was closer, still between the trees, still not moving, but closer by, at least 10 feet. I hadn't seen him take a step. And somehow, the angle of his head had changed, tilted slightly to one side, like he was listening for something. Or someone. My chest tightened. I don't believe in much beyond what I can see and touch. But there's a story folks around here tell about Pine Gap. They say the eyeless man walks the woods during storms, shows up without warning, watches without blinking because he can't. Face pale as bark. Features slack except for the blank space where the eyes should be. Most call it a campfire tale. But I'd never heard that story while staring at the shape of a man who didn't blink, didn't breathe, and didn't back off when a truck's high beams hit him straight on. I told myself to drive. Just finish the route. Drop the letter. Head home. But something about the figure held me there. The way it didn't flinch. The way the storm didn't seem to touch it. And with each rumble of thunder, I swore it was just a little closer. I eased the truck forward, trying not to look directly at the figure. My eyes flicked from the road to the mirror, to the trees lining the edge of the ridge. But I didn't see him anymore. For a second, I thought maybe he'd slipped off into the woods, or that I'd imagined the whole thing. But then thunder rolled again, long and deep, like something groaning under the mountain. I looked up and he was there, 10 feet from the road, standing perfectly straight this time, head still tilted, arms just slightly raised. The storm cracked open above me, a jagged fork of lightning tearing across the clouds, and for a split second, I saw his face, blank, bone pale, no eyes, no lids, no hollows. Just smooth skin where the eyes should have been, like someone had tried to draw a face and stopped halfway through. The mouth hung slightly open, as if frozen in the beginning of a word. And that head tilt, it wasn't human. It bent just past the natural range, like the neck wasn't built right. I pressed the gas. The truck groaned up the incline, tires spitting gravel as the trees closed in. The house wasn't far now, maybe another quarter mile. I gripped the envelope tighter in my lap, my eyes scanning the tree line, expecting to see him again. Another boom of thunder, sharper this time, echoing in my ribs. I risked a glance out the passenger window. He was walking now. Pines blurred past. But I saw him between them, same steady pace, same blank face, no eyes, no urgency. Just keeping time with the truck, as if we were part of the same route. I made the last turn, and the Corley place came into view, a squat house set back from the road, porch light flickering with the rhythm of the storm. I pulled into the drive too fast, braked too late, skidding slightly on the wet stone, jumped out without even killing the engine, envelope in hand, and sprinted to the porch. Every step felt like I was being watched. Not from a window, from behind. I dropped the letter in the box, didn't even bother with a knock, spun around and scanned the woods. He stood at the edge of the yard, closer than ever now, only a few feet from the last tree. Lightning flashed again, full white this time, and there he was, still staring with a face that didn't see. No wind moved his coat, no rain touched his skin. Just that expressionless blankness and the impossible tilt of his head. And then darkness. A full second passed. When the light returned, he was gone. I ran to the truck, slammed the door, and peeled out down the mountain, gravel spitting behind me. Didn't look in the mirrors, didn't slow down till I hit the highway. Rain chased me the whole way back, and I didn't stop until I was in my driveway. Engine off, chest tight. The next morning, I checked the truck before heading out again. On the mat where my boots had rested, there was a single puddle, perfectly shaped like a bare footprint, facing inward. I'd been fishing the elk since I was old enough to hold a rod. Grew up not 10 miles from its widest bend, and when the days got long and the nights stayed warm, I'd pack up my gear after dinner and drive out past the power station, down to the gravel pull-off by Miller's Bluff. My name's Ron Ellison, 52, widowed, semi-retired welder. I fish to clear my head, mostly, these days. Quiet is the only thing that sits right with me. That night was still, mid-July. The kind of summer evening where the stars show up early and the cicadas never quite stop their song. I had a lantern hooked low to the tackle box and a cooler beside my camp chair, half full with warm soda and a couple of bluegill I'd pulled in earlier. The moon was low and hazy, casting more glow than light, and the river moved lazy and dark. I'd cast out and reeled in slow, not expecting much, just there for the rhythm. I didn't notice the figure right away. Maybe it had already been there. Down past the willow snag where the bank starts to drop off steeper. I caught it out the corner of my eye, something hunched, small at first, or maybe just crouched. It faced the river, unmoving, shoulders rounded and twitching like it was shaking from the cold. Except it wasn't cold. The air was thick and warm, heavy with summer damp. I stood up slow, squinting past the lantern's reach. Thought it might be a drunk, or maybe someone trying to fish the shallows with a hand line. I called out not loud, just enough to carry, "You all right down there?" No answer, no shift, just that tremble, like the figure was straining or stuck. I waited. 5 seconds, 10. Then it moved barely, like it had heard me but wasn't ready to respond. That's when the feeling hit me. Not fear, not exactly. Just that wrong kind of quiet, like the river had dropped a little too low, or the air pressure had dipped sudden. My skin prickled. The lantern hissed low as the fuel thinned out. I grabbed my flashlight from the crate and shined it toward the figure. It didn't turn fully, just enough to show that where a face should have been. There was nothing but shadow, deep, sinking shadow, like a hole carved into the air. Not darkness, not a blur, more like a place where light refused to stay. My breath caught. I didn't move. My thumb hovered on the flashlight switch, but I didn't shut it off. Then it started to straighten. Not fast, not slow, just stiff, like the bones didn't know how to move right. I didn't hear it breathe. Didn't hear clothes shift or feet stir the grass. But the figure stood taller now, spine wrong, shoulders still twitching. I took a step back and felt something cold against my toes, Looked down. The ground was dry, but droplets were forming on my boots. Cold, sharp, like spray from a wave. And the river hadn't moved. I blinked, wiped my hand across my boots as if that would clear something up. But the wet stayed. Cold. Steady droplets that had no business being there. The river was smooth as glass, barely lapping the edge of the mud line. No wind, no splash, just those droplets and that figure. Now, fully upright, just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. I should have backed away, should have packed up and gone. But something held me there, some stubborn part of me that still believed this was just a trick of the dark. Then the figure took a step. It was soundless, not even the crush of wet grass. Just a sudden shift forward, closer to where the willow bowed over the bank. The branches didn't move around it, they hung still, as if they'd gone stiff. I aimed the beam higher, directly at where the face should have been. Still nothing. Just that same hollow place, that same refusal of light. Like the face was gone and the space where it should have been was empty in a way that had no bottom. I took another step back and nearly tripped over the tackle box. The lantern had gone out completely now. Fuel sputtered and spent, leaving only the dim cone of my flashlight. The chill at my feet climbed to my knees. A seeping cold that didn't belong to any summer night I had ever known. I knew the stories. Of course, everyone who fished this river long enough did. About the man who drowned back in the 80s. Body never found. Current took him, they said. Or maybe the river kept him. Some folks swore he still walked the banks, hunched and soaked, looking for the lungs he'd lost. The figure stepped again. Now it was maybe 10 feet from the edge of my light. And the way it trembled made my stomach knot. It didn't sway like someone unsteady. It pulsed sharp, quick, unnatural, like something that couldn't hold shape. I called out again, voice tight in my throat. You need help. No answer. Just that silence, the kind that doesn't wait for you to fill it. I started to pack, hands fumbling at the reel and cooler. I didn't care about the rest. Leave the chair. Leave the bait, just get to the truck. But as I turned, I felt it again. That spray, cold, wet, like a wake had passed around me. I turned back. The figure was gone. No rustle, no splash. Not a single ripple on the river's skin. Just empty grass and the sound of distant crickets creeping back into the night. I stood there frozen for another minute, waiting for something to move, for anything to explain what I'd seen. Nothing did. I grabbed what I could carry and left fast, boots tracking mud and dew across the grass. When I reached the truck, I looked once more toward the river. Flashlight beam skimming across the willow's sway. Nothing there but dark water and stars too far away to help. But even now, weeks later, I sometimes find damp footprints on the porch by my back door. They're not mine. It was just past midnight when I took the turn onto Rattlesnake Pass. Tires humming against old asphalt, patched too many times to count. I'd been driving back to campus from a weekend visit with my folks in Johnson City and figured the back roads would save me an hour. I'd done it before cutting across these narrow stretches through the hills, but something about that night felt different. The air was heavy, not with fog, but with stillness, like even the bugs and night birds were holding their breath. I'm Marcus Blevins, 21, third year at App State. Usually, I've got music on or a podcast playing when I drive. But my phone had died somewhere around Roan Mountain, and I didn't feel like messing with the radio. So it was just me, the hum of the engine, and the sound of my own thoughts bouncing around. The road curved hard at the base of the ridge, tall grass and scrub pine pressing up against both sides like a green tunnel, the moon throwing long shadows across the cracked pavement. I saw the figure at the edge of my high beams. At first, I thought it was a tree too still, too tall to be anything else. But as I got closer, I realized it stood separate from the brush. A man, or something like one, nearly 7 feet tall, wearing a long coat that hung stiff like it was soaked through, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in complete shadow. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood inches off the white line with his arms straight at his sides. My heart jumped into my throat. I didn't slow down. I don't know why. Some part of me felt like slowing would have been the worst thing I could do. I kept the wheel steady and tried not to look too long. But as I passed, I saw the figure turn. Not walk, not step, just pivot. And the head tilted. Far too slow, like a heavy object leaning in water. The rearview mirror showed nothing but road behind me for a few seconds. Then the outline appeared again, small now, at a distance, still standing at the edge, still watching. I told myself to breathe, told myself it was a trick of the light, a scarecrow maybe, some weird leftover from a Halloween prank. But a mile later, after a sharp switchback around a ledge, the road straightened and I saw him again. Closer this time. I gripped the wheel tighter. My knuckles went pale as bone, and the inside of the car felt smaller with every passing second. There was no way he could have gotten ahead of me, no turnoffs, no side roads. Nothing but a sheer rock wall on one side and a steep drop on the other. But there he was again, standing just off the shoulder like he'd been waiting. Hat brim low, coat unmoving in the still air. Face swallowed in shadow. This time, I slowed. Not because I wanted to, but because my foot eased off the gas on its own. Curiosity mixed with fear, some primal part of me needing to confirm it was real. My headlights brushed over him, and I saw more clearly now the coat was tattered at the edges, stiff like leather, soaked and dried too many times. The brim of the hat had a greasy shine, and beneath it, only blackness, not just shaded black, like it had no depth, like the space where a face should have been had caved inward. Then he moved, a step, toward the car. I slammed the brakes. He was close now, so close that if I reached out the window, I could have touched the hem of his coat. But I didn't move. Couldn't. My eyes locked on that hollow under the hat, waiting to see eyes, a mouth, anything. But there was nothing, just that awful, oppressive dark. There's a story I heard once. Sitting around a bonfire freshman year, someone mentioned Rattlesnake Pass. Said there was a man murdered there back in the 40s, shot and left in a ditch by someone he knew. The body was never found, only rumors. Folks started seeing a tall figure along the pass during late-night drives, always standing still, always turning to watch. They called him the Pass Watcher. Said he was still looking for whoever did him in. That story came back sharp in my brain as he took another step. That tilt of the head again, curious. Slow, not threatening, like he was waiting for me to speak or confess. I jammed the shifter into drive and floored it. Gravel kicked up as the car fishtailed on the wet shoulder. But I caught traction and rocketed forward. My heart was hammering so hard, I could barely hear the engine. I didn't look back at first, just drove. Windows up, lights on, trying to outrun something I didn't understand. But I glanced in the mirror. He was still there. Not walking, not chasing. Just standing in the center of the road now, facing the way I'd come. Like he'd never moved at all. Like he'd always been watching,